ready to
Bomba! Welcome to Bomba Live, the show you've been waiting for. Subscribe to Bomba Live anywhere you download a podcast or on YouTube for these insightful and entertaining conversations con Bomba. I'm here at the iconic Pyramid Club on top of Philadelphia, and of course, I'm here with my co-host, author, activist, y la moncionera, Dionely Reyes. How are you, Dionely?
Así es. Oh, I'm feeling amazing. I feel great to be here. And I just want to say thank you to SBX Productions for producing the show today.
Absolutely. Here we're on the Pyramid Club. Must respect our buddy here, Taylor, in the background, making everything happen. Dionely, I must admit, I got 3 Dominican compadres. I get around a little bit Dominican community, and I must admit, I never heard of Monsión until I met you. So tell us a little bit about this little pearl in the middle of the Dominican Republic, Monsión.
Oh, it's a beautiful town with beautiful people. You go to that town and everybody looks como que viajan, because that's like a, that's a thing.
Stylish bunch
Great,
out there.
Stylish, happy, very entrepreneurial.
Not
very
on the coast,
hardworking.
right? So
it's not on the coast. It's in El Cibao.
Yes.
And is known for its casabe, cassava bread.
Nice.
And we dance a lot of merengue típico there. So it's an amazing place.
That's what I'm talking about. I'm merengue típico.
So a lot of
I'm cool, but I like that stuff.
A lot of the bodega owners in Philadelphia are from my hometown.
De Monsión. Okay. Very, very nice. Very, very nice. My mother similarly is from the Campo. Mama's Morocovis, which is known for El Toro Verde, which is the zip line, the famous zip line, and the Chupacabra, the first appearance in Puerto Rico, sort of brought it back into prominence. Dionely, later on the show, speaking of Dominican queens, like yourself, there's a controversy with another reina that we wanted to get your take on. And you're also going to lead the conversation later in the show about the importance, while we're in the midst of celebrating Latino Heritage Month. So the importance of not just celebrating it, enjoying it, acknowledging it, but really taking ownership of this very special time of year. But first, Dionely, I wanted to get into a conversation with you. I've been meaning to have this conversation with you on Bomba Live for some time because it is clear from following you on social media and knowing you as a friend that you have really centered your life even more so on spirituality the last few years. And so I think it'd be instructive. This is a lot of conversations that we don't get to have on camera a lot of times about our spiritual lives and how it relates to the work we do as activists and influencers. So Dionely, can you share a little bit about why this has been such a renewed focus for you recently?
Well, first I want to talk about what brought me kind of to this point in my life. So a lot of people say they're spiritual, but there's different kinds of spiritual. Like there's people that worship certain things. They're spiritual too, but I'm in the process of getting to know the God of the Bible. So way back in the way, I don't know if I should say the year, but many years ago, my dad passed away. And I had like a grudge. I was holding a grudge against God. You know what I mean?
Right?
He died. Yes, he was 49. He died in a car accident. Yeah. So that was horrible.
I turned 49 in 2 months.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it's crazy.
So since I held a grudge against God, I didn't look to God for comfort. So of course we need comfort. So I was looking in the wrong places. And then one day, many years later, I was feeling sad. I felt this void. And then I called on to God, clamé a Dios. I'm not sure how to translate clamé but prayed on to God and called on to him. And then I was inclined to open the Bible. It said, open the Bible. And I opened it. The first thing I read, I wasn't looking at anything. I just opened it, and then I read the first line, and it said, I will be your father. And that scared me. I'm like, what?
That is scary.
Closed it?
Yeah.
No. So then instead of me going towards God again for comfort and everything and guidance, no. I looked onto other things. And then in life, there are people who look for people who are vulnerable, who are looking for guidance. There are good people, but there are also people who are narcissists, psychopaths.
Play off those insecurities.
They play off those. They're vultures.
They can
sense it, and then they want to take the place of God in your life. They want to be the all-knowing, the all-powerful, and no one else is supposed to take that place. Right. So then later on, many years later, I called on to God again, and then I let myself be led by God and to get me out of this very tough situation, which is where I co-authored, finally later on, I co-authored a book where I discussed like surviving gaslighting. So I talked about how God helped me in that situation. And then just, let me see.
Well, let me ask you this question, Dionely.
Okay.
What
Now,
led you back
what led
to
me
the
back
place where you were able to really
completely?
engage in
Okay.
this moment with God?
So then I started this show called Aprendiz Live, where I would read like books and reflect on it with a friend of mine. And then we read a couple books. And then I'm like, something's telling me to read the Bible. But like people have told me, don't read the Bible by yourself. You're going to go crazy. And I'm like, why do people say that? And so
It
that one,
actually gives you a lot of clarity because everyone can interpret the Bible a bunch of ways. But what I find is that when you engaging with your spirituality, whether it's reading the Bible, whether it's praying, whether it's going to a church, what have you, or doing works, is that whatever the message is that you need is what you receive at that time.
exactly. So then my grandma passed away last year. And I thought that it wouldn't hurt as much as when my dad passed away, because my dad passed away suddenly. He was 49. My grandma passed away. She had been suffering from Alzheimer's for many years, and she was 87. So I thought it's like, okay, my mind knows, like my brain knows, like it's her time to go. But there are things that your brain, like your mind knows, but your heart, it takes more time to understand it. So then my mom basically assigned me to be the one that would speak, to give the eulogy. And then something that described my grandmother was in Proverbs, the virtuous woman, mujer virtuosa. So then I read that as part of the eulogy, and I'm like, and then and she asked me on occasion to lead our family in prayer. And I'm like, I don't really know how to pray. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then a part of that, La Hora Santa, is to discuss el Evangelio del Día. And that's part like of the Bible, like the Bible verses of the day. So that will open. I'm like, this gives me so much comfort. And it's not as daunting and scary as people made it out to be.
Well, it's interesting because it's almost like, not to psychoanalyze the moment of the situation, but it's like, as I'm hearing this story, it feels to me like the spirit of your grandmother was trying to tell you like you could handle it. And you could handle this moment as a leader in your family, but also most importantly, to continue her legacy of being a virtuous woman.
Yes, absolutely. That's exactly it. And then I told my friend, like, let's read the Bible together on the show. And then he couldn't do it. He moved to Spain, his schedule and everything. He couldn't do it. And I'm like, let me just do it. So then I just started reading it, and I'm learning so much. And it's like really powerful. And it's also, there's a lot of drama. There's a lot of tea. I'm like, Jacob, what is going on? I tell my sister, like, girl, listen to
There was a lot going on there. Well, the Bible's
lot.
a lot going on. Dionely, so how did you take the next step, feel comfortable sharing more of this journey with us on social media?
Well, the show that I was doing previously, Aprendiz Live, where we would read a book and then reflect on it, I would post about it. So then I'm like, well, why not post about what I'm learning in the Bible? So that was it. And then I learned that in life, I can't live to please other people, because people have different opinions, or they might think one thing one day and they'll think something else the next day. So then you're going to be like that song, that The Candle in the Wind, not knowing who to cling to. But what God wants you to do is always what God wants you to do. You know what I mean? And I always pray to God, like, please turn me into the woman you need me to be so I could fulfill the purpose that you have for me. Oh, that rhymed. I didn't even mean it to rhyme.
And then how would you, what's your advice to people that are kind of going through this journey, but they feel scared about sharing about it? Because I know for myself, like I think my spiritual life is fairly personal and like private. And I guess it should be whatever you want it to be. But a lot of times people do feel compelled, and there's a reason they feel compelled to share something at that moment, but they may be nervous about it. What's your advice to people that feel like they want to share a little more, give a little more, but they're apprehensive, like you've been in different parts of your journey?
So everybody's process is different. So some people, maybe they are getting to know the God of the Bible, but they don't feel compelled to share it, and that's fine. But if you feel compelled to share it, then pray to God to give you the discernment of like how to do it, and do it when you're ready. And also, it's important for people to understand what the bite model is,
Hmm.
because there's a lot of people that are like
Yeah.
false prophets.
Yeah, we know about a few of those. Yeah.
So the bite model, it was created by Stephen Hassan. He was in a cult. So the bite model discusses like behavior control, information control, thought control, and emotional control. So you got to be like understanding of what that is, because there's a lot of people that feel like a void. And like I said earlier, there's people out there that are vultures and they look for people that have that void, and then they disguise themselves as like a religion or this is a spiritual organization, and then they're just going to lead you astray. And you don't want that. So it's important to understand that part. And it's also important to heal through what we have available, that is like psychologists, like go to therapy
Hmm.
also. So to help you process the information, help heal what you've been through, but then also having God in your life to see you through, and then have more clarity in how you should be presenting it, if you should be doing it publicly on social media or not.
Yeah, it's interesting because and I know you're going to ask a few questions in terms of my spiritual journey,
Hmm.
but I wanted to share that, I pride myself on having some of these knowledge bases and wanting to provide people information on politics or some of the other issues that I'm pretty familiar with. And then the stuff that gets the most reactions when I talk about this conversation
Hmm.
about spirituality and my health scare last year, and just the fight I've had internally about what does this project and this, like, why am I so compelled to do this? And have Bomba Live and have people like you on the show. And so it's just, but at the end of the day, it is my spiritual journey.
Hmm.
And I have to trust and have faith ultimately that there's a reason I'm doing this.
Hmm.
So it's a big part of my life as well.
Exactly. And so I always remember Genesis 50:20, where Joseph, I don't know if you know his story, that his
Yeah.
brother sold him into slavery. He told his brothers, what you meant for evil, God meant for good, so we could see and live what we're living right now. So it's all for a reason. It's all for a purpose.
That's right.
So how's your spirituality led you to a career in politics?
It's the basis of it. I grew up like super Catholic school kid, like from kindergarten to 12th grade. And I went to an all boys Catholic school of all things. Shout out to Roman Catholic. That, you know, I actually paid attention, I think, somewhat. And I always went back to Jesus' story, that Jesus had was born a refuge, a homeless refugee. And Jesus grew up very, working class, poor. Jesus's homies were the what would be considered the street guys or the gang members of his day. He supported poor people. He spoke truth to power against the powerful. He died speaking up for the voiceless, essentially, and all of us who are sinners. And so I always just kind of kept that to my heart and always kind of wondered, well, why did I grew up, in North Philly, and it's like God gave me these opportunities for a reason, to get to decent schools, to have some talent, to be able to mobilize people and to connect with people, and a relatively healthy life. And it's like God didn't just do that so I could just live a nice life and ball out. It was like I have a responsibility,
Hmm.
in obviously the most extreme way that Jesus did was to help other people. And
Hmm.
and it's also been guiding my political philosophy. It's like, we should focus on people that just need a little help and are the most vulnerable. And that's why I'm such a strong advocate for, whether it's certain immigrant populations or just people that are in dire straits, to just give them opportunity. Because I grew up around people that had all this talent, had all this ability, but because maybe my parents were a little better off and I just had a few more opportunities, my life went a different direction than theirs. So it's, Jesus' story in particular is the basis for all of it in a lot of ways.
So you think about like, what would Jesus do? And then you're guided by that.
Well, yeah, I mean the it's funny because if Jesus was around now, he would be so ostracized by
Mm.
our mouth. You're a socialist, you're a communist, you're poor, your mom was, a migrant and all this stuff. And it's like, So I see the parallels. I'm like, so I need to, you know, be in some way my contribution of what Jesus would want us to do in this modern day.
So, what would you say to people who stay away from politics because they're focused on their religious life?
Yeah, no, it's something that is a very interesting conversation, and I want to have more religious figures. Dionely, I think it would be great to have some religious figures on the show with you
Mhm.
and people that are involved in spirituality to keep this conversation going. But I think it's really important. Look, I mean, first of all, everyone has a right, and it happens to me all the time because I'm the political guy, right? So I'm at the barbecue, what have you. All right, I don't like that. I'm glad you do it, but I don't like that stuff because it's yucky and it sucks. And look, I grew up in a Philadelphia Catholic church and a Catholic church that's had a lot of issues. And
Mhm.
so I've had to, as a Catholic, I've had to balance an institution I have a lot of problems with. Um, but the fact that, my faith deserves us to stay engaged in the same way that, while going to church and being spiritual is wonderful, and I don't besmirch anyone from doing that, but faith without works is dead.
Mhm.
And unless you engage in some way to help other people or have an opportunity to, and choose not to because politics is tough or yucky, then on some level you're not doing what God is asking you to do because
Mhm.
God isn't. I have not had the success in my political career or in Bomba Live because I sat around feeling sorry for myself, saying, "Oh, it's hard to." Find someone that has nice microphones, and it's hard to do this, and it's hard to do that, and it's hard to break through, and it's hard to do it when you're in your basement and 7 people watch the show, and but on some level, God's compelled me to do it. So God doesn't always compel you to do easy things,
Mhm.
and so you have to take on that challenge. And so I'm not saying everyone has to be run for office, but if more of us just did contributed their part to organizing, to educating people about why voting is important, what are the impacts of voting, and we're going to talk about that in a second, that we would all be better off and we would actually be able to live more faith and values through society than we do now because not enough of us get involved.
Mm. That's true. That's very interesting. And if certain things that God compels you to do were easy, then
Then it'd be easy.
anybody could just do
Then
it,
anybody could
and
just do it.
you wouldn't need to count on him to help you empower yourself and gain the skills to be able to do what you're being compelled to do.
Dionely, before we go to break, I want to give one example to our people, our Bomba Live community. So the real high end political stuff that's going to impact millions of people, including a lot of people that are watching us today. So the federal government just announced that through some legislation that was passed last year, the Inflation Reduction Act, that now the federal government's going to negotiate for the 10 pharmaceutical drugs, basically get a lower price so that when senior citizens, Medicare recipients receive it, they don't pay as much. So, and it's drugs all the senior citizens in our lives take, diabetes medication for Crohn's, all kind of stuff. And so there's that didn't just happen. That's going to help a lot of people. That's going to be something that God would want us to do, right?
Mhm.
Keep our seniors healthier. Talk about the story of your wonderful grandmother, right? Like
Mhm.
you'd want to do everything you can to make sure she had all the medical support she needed in the last years of her life. And so that took me being in this business and politics and organizing. I know that took hundreds of thousands, millions of people to advocate for that for decades. And so even though we don't think of it as a spiritual thing, to help other people have the medical care they need to me is something that God would want us to do. So
Mhm.
I challenge people watching this and maybe are frowned upon politics to really think about it in another frame. And I think that'll be very instructive and look, we need their talents out there. There's a lot of work to be done to improve our quality of life. Dionely, we're going to take a quick break. We're going to totally flip it because we're going to take a quick break and hear from a great friend of ours, a great social media influencer, Ivelisse Matos, a.k.a. the Funky Bacalao, who gave Bomba Live a shout out recently. When we come back, Dionely, we got to talk about Dominican Queens. There's a lot going on with y'all. We come back here on Bomba Live, the show you've been waiting for.
Mara! I just found out that Ray Collazo is celebrating his 10-year anniversary of being in the podcasting world. Ray, thank you so much for your humanity and for your humility. You've been a great friend to me, and I wish you nothing but great continued success, my friend. A la familia de Bomba Live, sigan por ahí gozando de la Funky Bacalao.
Welcome back to Bomba Live, the show you've been waiting for. On today's Presente segment, Ray wants to ask me about this Dominican Queen controversy.
Dominican Beauty Queen controversy. We are going to get back to that, but Dionely, I cannot. Evilise just shouted us out all the way from Miami. And I was thinking, and I want to shout out Evilise Matos, the Funky Bacala, Jersey Rican, Yes He Smiles, all of our. We have like a nice Miami base for Bomba Live down there. And I was thinking about it. Like, I think of you kind of like with a lot of Miami style. Do you wrote? What's your go-to when you go to Miami? Like, when you go to when you think about Miami? What do you think about? And what's your MO when you're down in South Florida?
When I go to Miami, I like to go to
the world wants to know this.
I like to go to the Design District.
Okay.
They have good restaurants there. It's not just
Yes,
the high-end shops.
No doubt.
But I really like it there because the club scene is not really my thing. Like, I would go maybe, but I like how like quiet it is. And it's not super quiet, but there's like, a
lot of floss, a lot of people watching that area. It's very nice there.
And it has good restaurants too.
Yeah. I want to get to Art Basel, the art festival that they do, and it's in December. It's not as hot. A lot of celebrity stuff.
I also enjoyed going to the golf tournament. The Honda Classics in Palm Beach.
Very nice.
That was fun. I got a nice sunburn.
The SPX guys would appreciate that. Our big sports guys, they like that kind of stuff.
That was fun.
Oh wow, maybe you should. Wow, you should be part of one of their golf excursions.
That would be fun. And I'll make sure to wear sunblock.
There you go.
Because you can get really bad sunburn. Yes.
I actually got invited. I have a connection. It's a long story, but with the Wilshire Country Club in LA, and actually I did get invited to the women. The women have an LGPA a golf event there for the women's tournament, and so I actually got invited there and I get like VIP access and all this stuff, but I don't got to walk around. I got to play. So very cool. Much respect to our friends in the golf world. Dionely, big controversy here. So recently, the Miss Dominican Republic was crowned. The woman is going to represent the Dominicanas at Miss Universe, and Mariana Downing won the competition, which was interesting because at one point, she apparently, Spanish is not her first language. So at one point she requested during the competition to answer a question in English. She did, and then she presumably won. So this has caused a lot of controversy in Dominican social media. Okay, she shouldn't have won. And she does not really represent Dominicans. So when you first heard this whole thing went down, what was your initial reaction?
My initial reaction was she should have answered the question in Spanish, which you probably weren't expecting that I would say that. But yes, the primary language in the Dominican Republic is Spanish. The event took place in Dominican Republic, but I understand why she won marketing-wise.
Yeah, she's a model.
She's a model.
She used to date Mark Anthony.
Exactly.
She's an IG kind of
star. And she's answering the question in English that would be controversial and it will go viral. So I understand why she won.
It's interesting because this similar situation happened with Miss Puerto Rico a few years back. Madison Berrios won the competition, and she answered. She did most of the competition in Spanish, but she flubbed a few words. So she did a couple Spanglish moments, but she still got booed during the event. She ended up winning the event and subsequently has sort of redeemed herself, not only doing well in Miss Universe, but also winning a reality show recently. So, and we're going to talk about some of the demographics in the country in a moment. Dionely, the Dominican-American community is becoming a bigger part of the larger Dominican family. So how do you think this moment speaks to how Dominican identity is evolving with this growing presence of Dominican Americans in the mix?
Well, I think that Dominicans in the diaspora are feeling more included because there are a lot of Dominicans that were raised in the United States that don't speak Spanish or they feel uncomfortable speaking Spanish. So they feel represented in that. But I still feel that learning Spanish, especially if you're representing the country in a competition, you should know the language. That's like, that I've been on my fitness journey.
Yes.
I'm not going to go on a fitness competition. Like, I'm not at that level yet to represent that. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So
there's levels.
Exactly.
I agree with you. They have actually, the other part of the dynamic with Madison and actually some of the other recent winners that were pretty, their Spanish was pretty good, is that they haven't lived on the island. I think 3 of the last winners of the competition until recently are Florida-based Puerto Ricans. That actually, in the case of Ashley Carino, actually was recruited because she had won Miss Florida and would be considered a strong candidate for Miss Puerto Rico, being bilingual and everything. And so, it's an interesting dynamic. I want to talk about Dominicans, Karl Anthony Towns, who for NBA fans is one of the top NBA players, one of the best basketball players in the world. His mother was Dominican. She was actually a nurse. He was raised in New Jersey. Unfortunately, she passed away during COVID. She was a victim of COVID. And to represent for his mother, he plays for the Dominican basketball team instead of the American. And the Dominican Republic, because of him and some other good players, did really well in the World Championship. So y'all have a chance to go to the Olympics next year. And much respect to Kat for representing for Dominicanas out there.
Awesome. So on our Found in Translation segment, Ray will update us on a recently released study on the growing Latino population, the Pew Center's 11 facts about Hispanic origin groups in the United States. So Ray, what does this report tell us about the nearly 64 million Latinos living in the United States?
Well, I think the first thing, Dionely, is just for us to sit there for a second and think about that number. 64 million, that's probably a conservative estimate. That doesn't even include probably a little under 3 million Puerto Ricans that live on the island of Puerto Rico. For whatever reason, they don't include American citizens that live on the island in this study. But nevertheless, you're talking about basically 1 in 5 Americans at this point is of Hispanic descent, whether they were here multi-generations or recently arrived. So I just think in terms of just thinking about, broadly speaking, how, the growing influence and just the sheer number of Latinos in the country is shaping our country very quickly because we're such a young population. The average Americans around my age, the average Latinos in their mid-20s. And so that number is going to get to about a third in our lifetime to probably over a third of all Americans. So I just want us to understand the breadth and depth of this country's future is a Latino future, and we have to think about it that way. The other thing is that the diversity of the country within the Latino community is really interesting how it's evolving. When we were kids, Dionely, it was basically Mexican and Mexican Americans on the West Coast, Puerto Ricans and a small Caribbean population in New York and the East Coast, and Cubans and a few other Latinos in Florida. And so now that's not the case. There's a lot of the Mexican and Mexican American community percentage-wise has gone down about 5%. And so it used to be 70%. Now it's closer to 60. And in the meantime, the other groups, the emerging groups, Dominicans, El Salvadorans, other Central and South American groups have emerged and have very large populations. So the diversity is creating a lot of interesting dynamics, and the sheer numbers cannot be denied.
So how does that diversity of the Latino community impact our culture?
It'd be interesting. I'd like to hear your thoughts on this, Dionely, but I think that again, we as a community, we were a generation ago, we were largely segregated. There was Mexicans over here, Puerto Ricans over here, Cubans over there. Now, all of these communities are diverse. As you know, there's a growing Mexican population in the East Coast in New York City. Much respect to Mexicanos on the East Coast. There's a large growing particularly Central American population in places like Houston, Texas, Southern California. It's no longer just Mexican Americans. Florida, there's all the above. Everybody lives in Florida, all kind of groups. And so I think the fact that culturally we're really creating a distinct, because we're mixing our cultures together, Caribbean music, Mexican food, South Americans, fashion, that we're really creating kind of like a larger, really solidified U.S. Latino culture, which I think incorporates all these elements. I know you love Mexican music, for example.
Oh, yes.
And we all sort of interchange with these different cultural pieces from the other nationalities. So do you see that, Dionely? There's kind of, obviously you're probably being Dominican, I'm probably being Puerto Rican, but do you see like a growing kind of U.S. Latino culture that incorporates all these pieces?
Absolutely. For example, my son is half Puerto Rican and half Dominican, of course, on my side. And I just love how we're coming together more instead of us competing with each other. So yes, I am seeing that and a growing appreciation for each other's culture.
We need to do a whole episode just on the Puerto Rican Dominicans, how that group is taking over the world. I mean, Nicky Jam, Zoe Saldana, obviously Arturito, all the above. They're all just taking over. It's a nice, and my goddaughter, Nadia. So there's a lot of beautiful things when we all come together. The other thing, before we get into the political part of it, Dionely, I wanted to shout out again that in particular, there's a lot of groups that have larger populations. The study really highlighted the Venezuelan population has grown the most, and obviously that's because of the social issues in the country. So there's almost close to 1 million Venezuelans now in the United States.
Mm.
But in particular, the Dominican and El Salvadoran communities have now equaled and are surpassing Cubans as the third and fourth largest groups.
Wow.
So one of the things that it's going to be interesting to see is that how, particularly, I think Dominicans and El Salvadorans are going to take a more prominent role in our culture and our society, and that's really exciting. But all the groups, I mean, there's over 1 million Hondurans in the country now, and just the Puerto Rican population, the mainland has now zoomed up because of what's happened on the island with some of the issues.
Mm.
So there's a lot of interesting dynamics happening very quickly.
So how does it impact our politics?
Well, the numbers give us a lot more influence. So obviously, we not only can and are voting more. 80% of the Latinos of the United States are U.S. citizens. So once they're 18, they're eligible to vote. But we live everywhere now. It's no longer just 3 or 4 pockets of the country. So we have not only in the obvious states in the Southwest and in places like Florida, but in our home state of Pennsylvania, Dionely, and other swing states like even Wisconsin, Ohio, Virginia, the Carolinas, that we're seeing that the Latino vote is going to make a big impact and is going to keep making a big impact in presidential elections and Senate elections. The other interesting dynamic is that the House of Representatives, I would argue, is going to be determined by the Latino vote in places that you may or may not expect. Obviously, in communities like California or Texas, but I just came back from Colorado, Dionely, and had a great meeting with Congresswoman Yadira Caraveo. She is Dionely, the first and only Latina medical doctor in U.S. Congress. And so we had a wonderful conversation about paid leave and some of the other issues that she's advocating for. And that her district is not in Denver. It was like in the suburbs going into northern Colorado, sort of an emerging Latino area. So we have Latino voters in places like Oregon, New Mexico, Wisconsin, that are not just going to determine who's in the White House next year, but who's in the House of Representatives, which is really exciting. And, the other thing I would say is, for those out there, don't be intimidated by all this diversity, because oftentimes what happens with political candidates, it's like, oh my God, I can't, do we have to write a separate press release for the Puerto Ricans because they speak Spanish different than the Colombians? And, when we poll Latinos, even though there are those little nuances, Latinos basically believe in the same issues and want people to respond to our community in a way that respects our values, respects our community. So we don't have to overcomplicate it. And as we were talking about earlier, we have a growing unity amongst our community. Mientras tanto segment, Dionely wanted to highlight the need for us to not just celebrate Latino Heritage Month, but to be active participants in Latino Heritage Month. I think, Dionely, this is a very important topic. So glad you brought this up because we're doing the show during Latino Heritage Month. And so I know you had some thoughts for people about your journey with engaging in the month and why we need to be active participants during this month.
Yeah, so mientras tanto, we have to take the accountability and responsibility to learn more about our culture and teach our children about our culture, because we can't be proud of what we don't know. So the same way about like learning about the God of the Bible, I can't love what I don't know. So so my son and I, the place where I live is not as diverse as where I grew up. So I took it upon myself to ask my son's teacher if I could give like a presentation about Hispanic heritage.
Wonderful.
And I went and gave a presentation. And then in that process of me doing research, I learned like more things, because before I didn't really understand the difference between Spanish, Hispanic, and Latino. And a lot of people don't know that. Like, sometimes I ask people,
it's a very controversial topic in our community.
And he's like, oh yeah, I'm Spanish. I'm like, you're from Spain? Yeah. No, I'm not from Spain, but I'm like, no, then you're not Spanish. Exactly. You're Hispanic.
Yeah.
You're from a Spanish speaking country, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you're from Spain. And then if you're Latino, that means you're from Latin America. So that does not include Spain, but it does include Brazil. So that was interesting for me.
The whole Latinx conversation, which is a whole other conversation.
Yes.
What surprised you when you were doing some of this research?
There's a Spanish speaking country in Africa.
Yes.
I didn't know that.
Equatorial Guinea. Like
yes, it is. I was like, what? I
learned
know that.
I can't think of her name. I'm sorry, I'm not gonna be able to shout her out. But I had a woman that worked for me years ago who had done some missionary work there. She's Puerto Rican, from Philadelphia, and I said, why'd you go to Equatorial Guinea? She goes, well, it's the only country in Africa that speaks Spanish. So I wanted to be able to speak to the people there, and I don't speak French or these other languages. And then I ran into some gentlemen from Equatorial Guinea a few years ago in D.C., and they were in the lobby, so two African guys talking Spanish, and there was a Mexican-American woman sitting there in the lobby, and she goes, how do you guys know Spanish so well? And they were like, well, we grew up speaking Spanish. So, yeah, no, that was, I guess, the one colony that Spain had back in the days.
Okay.
So
That's
yeah,
really interesting.
It is that history is really interesting. Dionely, what's something that you think? How would you encourage people that maybe they're Latino or maybe they're not, but they want to just kind of learn more? How would you get people? What would be your advice to people that want to like start that process or continue that process of learning about their culture?
Well, now we have the power of Google.
Yeah.
You could go in and like learn about the history of where you're from or your family's from or your friends are from. And you could also see if you could travel there too to learn about it. And don't just focus on like the tourist parts. I like for when I travel to learn about the history of the places. So that's what I would encourage people to do. Like when you go on vacation, if you could go to like a museum or something, then you could incorporate that into your vacation.
That's a good point. Especially with this younger generation, I encourage them really to don't make assumptions. So one of the things that comes up, and I feel like I'm like a fact checker sometimes with Latino sports trivia online, but what happens is that with some of these newer new media outlets, when a Latino does something that's like interesting or different, they assume that it was the first Latino to do it. So they'll, I don't know if you ever heard, but Jaime Jaquez is like a Mexican-American basketball player. So he got drafted in the NBA. It's really exciting. Too many Latinos get to this level, especially Mexicans. And so there was all these media outlets that said he's the first Mexican-American to ever be drafted in the first round of the NBA draft. And so I go on all these all these social media outlets. It goes, correction, Mark Aguirre, who was an Afro-Latino who was of Mexican descent, but because he's black, nobody talked about being Latino back in the days, was drafted number 1 pick actually in 1980. So I'm like, y'all got to do your research. 43 years ago, another Mexican-American did this. So I would encourage people to not make assumptions. One of the people I wanted to shout out as part of this is that I want to shout out Janice Torres, who's a public relations expert in New York, a Latina that we collaborate with on some things. And so she's been promoting a lot about, people have forgotten the legacy of La Lupe. La Lupe was an Afro-Cuban queen of Latin soul in the 60s, 70s, very flamboyant. She had an amazing history from Cuba. There you go, yes. Dionely, also a karaoke star on her weekends. And so she's been really elevating this conversation around, yes, Celia's wonderful, Selena's wonderful, but La Lupe was there when there was a lot of discrimination, when it was harder for a woman, particularly of that time, to break through. And she broke a lot of those barriers, and even that Celia went past and others that have preceded her. You know, when we were kids, there were Latin pop stars. They just a lot of times weren't marketed that way. Probably someone you never heard of, Vicky Carr, Linda Ronstadt, Joan Baez, Irene Cara. And so, you know, there's a lot of pioneers that we have to remember as part of this conversation. Speaking of a great, Dionely, this has been a fantastic conversation on Bomba Live. Please give us a closing thought.
So hate stems from ignorance. So before you're inclined to hate something, it's better to be inclined to gain more knowledge on the subject. Like I said earlier, you can't really love what you don't know. So now, you know, I'm in this process of getting to know the God of the Bible. And I also encourage people to learn about other cultures. Like in this Hispanic Heritage Month, not just learn about your culture, but learn about other people's culture so that you could spread more love and be more understanding. Excellent.
My closing thought is, you know, it's the reason Bomba Live is that listen to what God's trying to tell you. And and the struggles, oftentimes the struggles and the anxieties you're going through is that you're not listening to what God put in your heart. So move on, because you're scary. What does it mean? That seems like that's going to be a lot of work.
I'm not worthy.
I'm not worthy of doing that. You know, I don't know where that's going to lead me, but trust me, God doesn't put it in your heart to tease you and put you in the wrong direction. Thank you so much, Dionely Reyes, my fearless co-host. Thank you, Taylor, and the crew at XBX Productions. Thank you, our friends here at the Pyramid Club. We're going to be doing a lot of activities, which we're going to announce very soon on social media here. Talk about leaning in on Latino Heritage Month. And please subscribe to Bomba Live on YouTube and anywhere you can download a podcast. And have a wonderful day. Con Bomba.